Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. I am AP Strange, and this is my show, and I got a little sponsor spot for you right now because this week's sponsor is Garmin Bozia, for the #1 go-to product for fear-based nutrition and corny, creamy goodness. Garmin Bozia, go get some at the Black Lodge nearest you. So on our show tonight, we are not disgusting. We are discussing the works of David Lynch and the life of David Lynch, who sadly passed away very recently, and some of the esoteric and metaphysical and paranormal aspects of that. And when I thought about doing this show after hearing of David Lynch's passing, I thought, who could I possibly get on to talk about this with me? And then I had a forehead slapping moment and said, of course, I have the perfect person. The person in question is a longtime paranormal researcher, ufologist, writer, academic, an actual honest-to-goodness professor, an author of such books as Mysterious Beauty, and I'm already forgetting the name of the other one. I should have wrote it down when you said it.
Final season.
Final season, a Lovecraftian quartet. You might have guessed by now, one of my favorite people to read or listen to and talking about paranormal and weird subjects. It is Professor WHAM. Welcome to the show, Professor WHAM.
Thank you for asking me to do this.
Oh, you're very welcome. Of course. Well, like I said, I heard about David Lynch passing, and I was like, it wasn't my first thought, but after a while, I'm like, I should do a David Lynch show. And then I could see your posts, and you actually changed your profile picture to David Lynch's picture. And after a little while, I'm like, actually, Wham would be perfect to get into this stuff with. And you were on the short list of people I wanted to have on my show anyway. So things just kind of came together.
Yep. Well, he loved those synchronicities, although I doubt that he died in order to accomplish that. But
right. Yeah. Well, I mean, we did kind of talk before recording about the timing of his passing being kind of a synchronicity, regardless of his choice in the matter, which I don't think we really have a choice in the matter with synchronicities anyway. But do you want to get into that a little bit? What you were saying?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot for many of us. There's a lot of meaning around, or possible meaning, potential meaning around the time of his death, and not only because, as we later found out, in many ways he was a casualty of those LA fires, because that's part of what brought on his final descent into illness. Apparently was that they did have to evacuate. Although apparently, at least as far as what I know, his house was spared. So at least all of his paintings and stuff that were in there survived. But the fact that his birthday was on Inauguration Day, and also Martin Luther King Day. And for me personally, and I forgot to mention this beforehand, January 20th is also the birthday of, although in a different year, but it's also, she was born in a different year, but it's also the birthday of Eugenia Macer Story, who is one of my favorite paranormal and interesting Renaissance people. A lot of people don't know of her, but in my book, Mysterious Beauty, the very last chapter, the biographical chapter, is about Eugenia Macer Story. And she did she was sort of like Lynch in some ways. She just didn't make films. She wrote plays, surrealist plays, which were performed all over New York City. That's how she
Yeah.
made her living. So, for me, all of those layers of meaning made his death meaningful. I don't, for me, it wasn't tragic, maybe like it might have been for some people, because I know that he himself was not afraid of death, I don't think.
Right.
And he believed very strongly in the survival of consciousness after death. So I don't think he was afraid in a way that would have, made his situation tragic. He always faced things pretty squarely, from what I can tell. So, but to me, it was also ironic, in,
Right. Yeah.
in the largest sense of irony, you know, and
Yeah.
so
Given all of the horrors of the world that are happening right now. It's,
right,
yeah.
exactly. And well, and he was unafraid of looking at the dark side that lies behind the edifices that we create. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the most that's the thing you encounter head on in all of his work, is just kind of
mm,
this veneer of perfection, of kind of like a 1950s American dream kind of um, facade, but underneath that there's all this darkness, and the two coincide and just overlap in a way that most people would care not to think about. So yeah.
right, right. Well, and I think the reason why I've always liked him is because he portrayed reality pretty much the way I experience it, and how I've always experienced it, as a kind of, and I've expressed this in other places, a kind of non-linear associative combination of in equal parts of beauty and terror. And that's
Mm,
that's literally how I've always experienced life. Even as a child, I experienced life that way. And um, I so for me, he was, especially as I became aware of his work. I wasn't always aware of his work, like the
right.
the very first thing of his that I ever saw, but I didn't know that it was he that had done it. Was Elephant Man. That was the first movie of his I ever saw.
Oh, that
Um,
was a first for me too.
and
Yeah.
in high school, and I thought it was brilliant. I mean, I was like entranced by it. And then the second movie of his I saw was, and this was some years later when I was in a very vulnerable place in my own life, I saw Eraserhead and was completely traumatized. It just
Yeah.
completely messed up because I was not in a place where I could see it. And I didn't know that he had done both. I had no idea.
Mm,
And I saw, but then, like in the late 80s, after I had grown up quite a lot, I decided to see Eraserhead again, and thought it was the most hilarious thing that I'd ever seen in
yeah.
my life. And I still think it's hilarious because, once you're older, you get it. You're like, oh, this is what this is. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you have to have a certain kind of, or I had to have a certain kind of maturity in order to understand it. But and then it was after that I became obsessed with him, and especially then after Twin Peaks in the 90s, 80s and 90s, just obsessed. So, I got,
Yeah. I mean, I had a similar experience with Eraserhead, except I come to David Lynch by way of my best friend who passed away a couple of years ago, and we hung out and watched movies and shared music, and wrote together and wrote poetry and performed poetry at the same places. And I was always blown away by this guy's intellect and his just weirdness. And he was like the biggest David Lynch fan I ever knew.
mm,
And and he let me borrow his copy of Eraserhead. I think like within a week of me finding out that I was going to be a father, which wasn't a planned thing either. So he's like, oh, hey man, and like I do my Jeff impression every time I think of him, but he's like, hey, you ever watch this one, man? And I'm like, no. He's like, oh, you gotta watch this. It's the best. And I was like, so I watched Eraserhead, and I was like curled up in the fetal position, like rocking
Well, yeah, because it has that kind of emotional impact. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It
right.
does. It does. I mean, I'll never forget. I mean, the scene that always sticks out in my head in that movie is the scene where he's with his woman, and they're at the dinner table and they start to cut into the chicken and all this blood comes out.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and it's like, or
Oh,
or the scene where he kills the little worm baby or cuts the little worm baby open. I mean, it's like
oh yeah,
that's so intense. You know what I
yeah.
mean? My
Well,
God.
I mean, really, it was the lady in the radiator
Oh yeah.
is the thing that stuck with me and really haunted me too.
Uh, what
But
do you what do you think? Why do you think that haunted you? Why do you think that particular thing haunted you?
I think he does this in every work that he does, where there's an almost seemingly like out of place musical number where somebody is lip
Right.
syncing to something, and it pulls you into like a dream world. Uh, if the movie wasn't already surreal enough for you, you're now in this like totally dreamy, almost like you're sitting in a haunted theater watching what's happening on the stage, and you can't leave, like you're paralyzed or something, those pretty much any of the musical numbers are like entrancing to me, and they always blow me away. But that one with the woman, her cheeks are all like just basically two giant tumors or
Yeah.
goiters. I'm not really sure what's going
Well,
on. But that one just haunted me, and I think I was also just trying to block out the like expectant father stuff because that was a reality for me at the time.
Right, right,
So maybe I
right,
just focused on that more. But
right.
but yeah, I mean, I appreciated the movie still, and I loved it, and I revisited it later, and I'm like, I think this was pretty brilliant. And it's got this dark humor to it, but it's also kind of horrifying. So uh, that led me to check out other works, and I had to kind of push back against Lynch with him, and I was because I would tell him I don't get it. I feel like there's stuff I'm not getting, and it frustrates me.
Uh-huh.
Looking back now, I think what it is I've I've had my troubles with mental health. If you ask,
Mm.
if you trust the opinion of psychiatrists, um, but I mean, I've always just had a weird outlook on life, and I've always felt like I experienced time differently than a lot of people do, and
Right.
I've had times where dreams were almost the same as reality, and I think part of why I was resistant to it is because it scared me. It seemed too real. It seemed like somebody was
Right.
representing a reality for me that I didn't want to acknowledge had a basis with anybody else. To me at the time, it was my own crazy world that I lived in, and it was wrong, and I didn't want to acknowledge it. I guess
Right.
that's kind of how I look at it. And Jeff was the one that told me he considered David Lynch the greatest living surrealist. And being a huge surrealism guy, I was like, oh, oh no, now it all makes sense. Like that's where the marble dropped for me, and I
Hmm.
could really start appreciating it because surrealism is not about having a one-to-one equation of meaning that you're trying to convey to somebody. You're not making a direct statement a lot of the time in a surrealist work. It's more about the feelings it evokes and the
Hmm.
interpretation of the observer, you know. So
And the combination of really disparate things in unusual ways.
yes,
But if you watch all of his stuff, like I mean, I noticed this when I was watching. Like I told you before we got started, the one movie of his that I hadn't seen before we talked was Inland Empire, and so I went ahead and made sure that I watched it. And there's so much. I mean, I'm still digesting it. I'll probably have to watch it again. The thing about his films is that because of what they are, it's not a situation where you can like in most movies, they're divided into scenes, like on the disc. And so you can just like go to a scene. His
Yeah.
movies are not like that. You have to watch them all the way through. He doesn't do that scene thing.
Right.
And so you can't just, it's really, you can't just go back to one scene because it's connected to everything else. But in what I did pick up watching Inland Empire, it's really sort of, it combines, uh, it's like if you see the original Twin Peaks and then you see Fire Walk with Me and then you see Mulholland Drive and then you see Lost Highways and maybe a little bit of Wild at Heart, but there's not quite as much of that in there. And then see Inland Empire and then watch The Return, Twin Peaks: The Return. There's such a layering of similar ideas
Hmm.
between all of them and images. So just because you have disparate elements in Lynch's work, that doesn't mean that there aren't themes that he comes
Yeah.
back to. In fact, when you were talking about, that the radiator lady, the singing on the stage, I said, well, just compare her to that whole scene in Mulholland Drive of Silencio, where Rebecca Del Rio is singing,
Yeah.
Otis Redding's song in Spanish. I mean, there are some direct connections there in a really
Yeah.
interesting
Well,
way.
or in Blue Velvet, the lip
Yes,
syncing scene there,
yes,
which
yes,
that's
yes.
another just. I'm not thinking of the actor's name now. I always just think of him.
Isabella Rossellini.
Well,
She's the
oh, there's that. Yeah, there's multiple in Blue Velvet. I was thinking of the guy that they go to
oh,
his
the
house
guy.
and
Yes, yes,
he's singing like Roy Orbison or something.
yes. Right, exactly. Right,
But
exactly.
it's very clearly lip synced, and he's like all dolled up, and kind of an
Yes.
unusual role for him. He was the guy that played Al on Quantum Leap. That's my only reference point for that guy. I know he did a lot of work, but I can't remember his name right now.
Yeah.
But um,
But yeah, I mean, it's like so there are these recurring motifs. There's also in Inland Empire, there's a whole sequence of those, what now anyone who knows Lynch and Twin Peaks will recognize, a whole sequence of um, red theater curtains
mhm.
that the Lorna Dern character is going through.
Yep.
Nikki, I guess that's the name of the actress that Laura Dern plays. I
Yep.
don't know why I want to call her Lorna. I've never understood her name is Laura. But anyway,
Well, her name it kind of evokes Lorna Doone because
yeah, I
she's
guess it does. I
yeah,
guess it does. Which, for people who don't know, are a type of cookie.
yeah. Oh, I love my Lorna Doones. I love, but uh,
But anyway, yeah. So what else?
yeah, but she's in a lot of his movies too, and
Oh yeah.
that's another good um, thing for consistency in his work. Like a repeated theme is you see the same faces playing different
Yes.
characters, sometimes in the same movie. Like Mulholland Drive is a great example of that. But
Yeah.
or Twin Peaks, it's like there's always sort of a doppelganger or alternate person aspect. I think that's a recurring theme in his work.
Right. Yeah. Where he'll have an actor play the same, play two different roles with each
Yeah,
other. Yeah. I mean, and then having recurring people like Jack Nance or, um,
Kyle
uh,
McLaughlin.
yes, Harry Dean Stanton,
Yeah.
um, um, well, and then making the careers of people like David Duchovny and Naomi
Hmm.
Watts and Laura Dern. I mean, they owe a lot of their careers basically to starting out in his stuff, because he recognized something in them. Um, but
Although Laura Dern is an interesting one because her father, of course, was Bruce Dern, the
right,
actor, and her mother was she's in Lost Highway. No, she's in Wild at Heart. The woman that plays Laura Dern's mother in Wild at Heart was
hold
her
on,
actual mother.
hold on. Let me look. Yeah, I know. I'm old and my brain doesn't work anymore either. This is a useful function of
Yeah,
Google search. Um,
I just don't want to say the wrong name because we're
yeah.
covering kind of a lot tonight. So there's no
Right,
shame in
right.
forgetting names here. But
Diane Ladd. Diane
yes,
Ladd.
so
Yes.
she's Laura Dern's actual mother, and she's
Right.
in that movie playing her mother. And what I found interesting about that is, um, he has this fascination with Hollywood too. Like
Hmm.
Hollywood is a big thing, like recurring theme, and like the broken dreams, I guess, of it, the broken dreams aspect. And he has this habit of including actors, I think, that are kind of like part of a Hollywood dynasty. And in Lost Highway, you have that with well, I mean, yeah, there's Patricia Arquette's in that,
Yes,
um,
yes.
and Balthazar Getty. So
Hmm.
it's like you have these recognizable names. He includes Marilyn Manson, which I mean, whatever. But 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 his name is a combination of obviously Marilyn Manson or Marilyn Monroe and Charles Manson.
Right.
So I think that's the whole reason he even put him in the movie was like
Because
he's making
he's
these references. Yeah.
right, exactly. Well, and then in the straight story, I mean, in the straight story, the guy who plays the main protagonist is Richard Farnsworth, who is, this well-seasoned, well-known actor. That was actually his last role before he died, because he was
Hmm.
actually dying when that when they were filming. Um, so, I think he knew how to draw on people that were new and people that were seasoned actors. Well, in Mulholland Drive, I can't remember the woman who plays the landlady in Mulholland Drive. She
No,
was
I
a well,
definitely don't remember.
she was a well-known, a very, very well-known actor as well, like from the classic period of, see, I've got to look that up too, because this is what happens when you get old, is that I'm serious, you forget, like, it's like what's happening. Ann Miller, that's who it was.
Oh yeah.
Ann
Yep.
Miller. And she plays this cameo role and she's great.
Hmm.
And but I think what I really I mean, I enjoyed their performances, but what I have understood from listening to many interviews of people who worked with Lynch is that he was, like, actors almost universally loved him because
It does seem that way. Yeah.
he really was able to pull out from them places and things, and he was collaborative, places and things, and emotions that they had not experienced before. And like Inland Empire was, um, kind of experimental, because it was experimental in kind of the way that, the Blair Witch Project was. It's a very similar kind of movie to that.
Yeah.
It was all shot on his shoulder, you know,
Yep.
and it was shot without a script, just a basic sort of overview of some of the themes. And every day he and the actors would figure out what they were going to do and say, which is kind of
Yeah.
extraordinary when you think about
Yeah.
it.
That's amazing for the film that it is. Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, talking about actors and their uh, relationship with him or feelings about him. Uh, I thought this was a really weird thing because Michael J. Anderson, he was the little person that played the man
Oh,
from another place.
yeah.
He was one that didn't. I mean, that he had like crazy conspiracy theories about David Lynch at one
Oh,
point. Did you
really?
ever hear about
Really?
that?
I did
Yeah,
not. I did not.
he went like full Pizzagate QAnon
Oh,
and was like
really?
saying like David Lynch was involved in all this like sex trafficking and all this other stuff.
Mm.
And yeah, he just totally lost his mind, and that's why he's not in the return. So they
Well,
replaced him with a weird like Charlie Brown Christmas tree.
yeah, I know, I know. Yeah. Well, I guess, I mean, I can understand why maybe, I mean, when you look at some of Lynch's, the way, one of the things that Lynch has been criticized about is that, or 4, is that, his perspective is that of an American sort of middle class white guy.
Yeah.
And so he's not always politically correct. And
Yeah.
when you can see some of this, I mean, I think that he, if you look at the time in which he's filming, the time in which he is portraying certain things, that he's ahead of his time in certain ways, just, the whole character that David Duchovny plays in the first Twin Peaks as someone who is clearly making a transition between, we would call them we would call him a a trans person now, but at the time he would have been called a cross-dresser, or a transvestite. Right. Those were the words that were used to describe what he was going through. And then the reason for that the character gives in the show, it's like, oh, you played women undercover and realized you were a woman. You liked it better. It's kind of a weird thing to watch it now. It's weird. And there aren't a lot of people of color in his shows. I mean, there is Michael Horse in Twin Peaks. Certainly in The Return, there are more people of color, because he's dealing with scenarios in the Southwest, and in the West. But I can imagine that the way in which he treated or inadvertently may have interacted with that actor, because if you watch it now, they use terminology that is not appropriate now to describe him. He is sort of exoticized in a kind of way, so I can see where there might be some dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
And
I mean, if you listen to his claims, though, I mean, he's really just.
Oh well, yeah. Well, if he's gone full QAnon, then whatever. But
Right.
I think that Lynch was probably aware of some of those undercurrents himself.
Yeah.
And so that's why he sort of dips into them. But nobody else makes that claim about him. I mean, like Julie Cruz was kind of upset with the very tiny bit that she got in The Return, and she didn't feel like she got enough credit in certain ways, considering how much music that she was associated, considering that she and Angelo Badalamenti and Lynch did like what is it, at least 2 whole albums worth of music together. I think that she may have thought that maybe Lynch could have done more for her career, given her more credit. I'm not saying he was perfect at all, but oh well.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't think he ever claimed to be. I mean,
No,
I
I
think he
don't
was
think
very,
I don't
very.
think
Yeah.
no. And in fact, I've been reading through, as I told you before we started, I got the biography, Room to Dream, which is a very interesting biography that was published, I think, in 2016 or 17, about him. And it's done in an interesting way. Each chapter is divided into 2 portions. There's the one portion that is written by Christine McKenna, who's also done a lot of stuff with his artwork. Is sort of straight biography. She's the one that's done the interviews with people that he knew and, collated all that information. And so she'll write it, and then she gave it to him, and then he wrote his own account of the same stuff.
Oh wow.
Like what he remembered, his version of it. So it fills in some of the holes, but it's clear that as a kid, he was not, as a young man, I'm just up to him in his 20s now. But it's right before he made Eraserhead. But it's very clear that as a young man, a teenager, he wasn't a bad kid, but he got himself into things,
Right.
um, you can tell there are times when he's willing that more stuff happened than he's willing to talk about in terms of stuff he got himself into. And at one point he says, it was at a certain point in his life, let's see, it's on page 56 here. He talks about how he got involved with a kid, with an older teenage kid who was sort of into the bad stuff. He was into drugs and he was into running around, and he sort of hung with that crowd for a while. And then he says, the reason why I did this is I didn't like myself.
Yeah.
So he got out, he got away from those people. But, I do kind of get the sense that he may have seen things or experienced a few things that were unsavory. In here, he has
Well,
his first experience of getting high on marijuana. It's hilarious.
okay. Well, wasn't he? If I'm understanding this properly, he was born in the Midwest, right, and
He
then
would
moved to
he
like
would
Pittsburgh or something.
he was born in where was he born? I think he was born. Let me see here. What he remembers first is Missoula,
Oh, okay.
Montana. And let's see here. Yeah, he remembers Missoula, Montana first. And I can't remember now if he was born there, but it was very soon. If he was not born there, it was very soon after he was born that he moved there, because his father worked for the Forestry Service.
Okay.
So they moved around a lot, and as his father was doing work not only for the Forestry Service but also for the Department of Agriculture and other kind of connected agencies that are now they're trying to dissemble, uh, and
Yeah.
so his father was a federal employee, but so they had a fairly comfortable life. But one side of his family lived in a very urban area, and the other side of his family had like a ranch.
Hmm.
And so he got to experience those two sides of things,
Yeah.
the very rural and then also an urban existence. And then at some point they moved to Spokane, Washington, and then at another point they moved to Virginia and Arlington. So he experienced different parts of the country, significantly
Yeah.
different parts of the country.
Yeah. Because I had heard that it was kind of a shock one of the first times he was in a more urban area and that was kind of what inspired Eraserhead and a lot of the kind of industrial setting of it and industrial dystopia kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And when he was a little bit older, he ended up he was in Philadelphia for a while. And
Okay.
he did not like Philadelphia
Yeah.
at all. I say I like Philadelphia, which is kind of funny, but I like certain urban settings. And then he tried to go to school in Boston for a while, and that didn't work. And then he went to Europe for a while after he had decided to be an artist or a painter. And it took him a while to find sort of his place to be, but eventually he ended up in LA. And he has said numerous times that the reason why he liked LA and Hollywood is it was just the light. That's what he says,
Hmm.
just the light there, and sort of the vibe there.
Right.
Lots of things can happen. you know
Hmm.
people can become stars here, or they can become prostitutes here. Those are
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, it's like the city of broken dreams, and it definitely does seem to play a central role. Even if the movie doesn't take place in LA, it seems like it's the Hollywood aspect of it is like as a place you can go.
Right. No,
You know.
yeah, I think so. I think it has a lot, and I think the thing to remember whenever you're watching one of his films is he's not just simply portraying other things. There's always a self-examination that's going on.
Mhm.
So there's always some part of himself that he's, I think, revealing. Um, and so once I kind of understood that about him, then I could sort of put up with some of the imperfections of his delivery or deployment on occasion, because you're going to see if there's prejudice there, that's the prejudice he was raised with. If
Yeah.
there is uh if there are wrong opinions here, or if there's beauty here, or the things that he talks about, like he in this book he talks about how terrified the subway system was for him when he
Right.
encountered it in New York City. It just freaked him out.
Yeah.
you know um these kind of endless tunnels and the noise and the subterranean nature of it. He really had trouble with it. It haunted
Yeah.
him. It haunted him.
Hmm.
And so there were cities he liked and cities he didn't like. And I
So
think
you
that,
say that, it makes me think of like it makes me think of like Elephant Man with like the weird train station scenes and like the
right,
radiator pipe where you follow it down the pipe and stuff like that.
right, no, right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. Well, and if you watch many of his films, you'll notice that there one motif that you see over and over again is going through halls, going through dark halls, or they don't have to always be dark, but going through halls, through doors, and then going down dark roads. There's
Hmm.
just this kind of, twisting and turning through these corridors and not knowing what's on the other side. And, and that stands in for lots of different things. It stands in for traveling. It stands in for thoughts that people are having. It's like a dream image.
I was gonna say it's like dream logic where
Right.
you suddenly find yourself disoriented on the other side. You know. I think Lost Highway does that really effectively because there's a
Yes.
moment kind of backs into the darkness of the hallway, and then from that point on, that's a demarcation point that you don't realize right away. Like from that
Right.
point on, things were very different, you know.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah. Well, and you do have to. Well, and Mulholland Drive has a similar kind of segue. It's why I tell people, if you're going to watch Mulholland Drive and you've never seen it before, think of the first half as a dream, like a
yeah,
memory in a dream, and then the second half is like, well, it's still kind of a dream, but it's sort of it's not. It's something that's maybe really happening to this person.
mhm,
You know. Um, so but yeah, I mean, it's like, but so I think that the things that scare you or scare us in the films are the things that scared him.
yeah. Well, that's interesting to know and interesting to realize because I mean, it kind of means we have something in common with them, you know.
Yeah, and
Because I mean, at the time when my friend Jeff told me this, and I put those pieces together, it was like I had written what ended up being I later realized was more of like a hypersigil, and it was a series of 27 poems that I put into a booklet, and
mm,
it's very surreal, and it's expressing like some stuff I was going through at the time that was really hard for me. And actually, there's a bridge in the book that's super important, you know,
hmm
as an image. Um, and uh, I came to realize at some point that it's like that was my surrealist way of expressing a lot of things that I otherwise wouldn't want to really admit. And I kind of
right,
let him go by doing that, by producing a book and putting it out there. It was like kind of a sublimation of the energy that kind of push and pull within me to try to like rectify these opposite things, you know.
Right.
So I mean, that's where that made sense for me. But that book was based heavily on dream images, and I think that's where a lot of it just felt disconcerting for me in these movies. Like Mulholland Drive, I found endlessly frustrating. The first couple of times I tried to watch it, I
Well,
just found it so frustrating. You know,
yeah, well,
um,
what I tell people is if you, it's like one of my favorites of his, actually. And I mean, when I first saw it, I was like, you know, I mean,
yeah,
I don't know why, but I sort of get it. And what I tell people is in his mind, for him, Mulholland Drive is fundamentally linked with Twin Peaks. In fact, he
hmm,
thought of Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive as kind of being sister stories to each other.
yeah,
So what I tell people is watch Twin Peaks, the first, the first iteration of it. Watch Fire Walk with Me, which I think that film actually has aged really well.
yeah,
I mean, considering how much people hated it at the time, if you watch it now, it's timely in a really terrifying way.
hmm,
And then watch Mulholland Drive. Watch
okay,
those and then watch Mulholland Drive, and you'll see that
and then the return.
there are these well, and then there watch it. Well, yeah,
Oh, Inland
yeah,
Empire has to
actually,
be in
yeah,
there. Yeah,
yeah, watch Inland Empire. Well, and actually maybe watch Lost Highways too. Watch Lost Highways and Inland Empire, and then watch The Return. And like I told you, I think of The Return as an 18-hour movie. I don't think of it
right.
as a series that he filmed it and he broke it up.
Yeah,
Which he did actually kind of do.
right.
If you get like the DVD or the Blu-ray versions of The Return, the episodes, you can watch episode 1 and episode 2 separately, or you can watch them as one seamless piece. And if you do, it's edited differently, and it makes
Wow.
even more sense.
Okay.
If that's, and then when you go to like episodes 3 and 4, it's the same way. You can watch them separately or you can watch them all together.
Hmm.
And I don't think he has denied this because he was asked directly this and he denied it. But I've done it, and there is something to it. When people first watched The Return, that many people noticed that if you played the last two episodes side by side with each other at the same time, they overlapped in really weird ways.
Huh.
And in other words, you find some of the same symbolism emerging in at the same time, but it's like the opposite stuff. And so people concluded that he had purposely done that. He claims he did not purposely do that. But I was curious, so I did that myself. I rigged a couple machines up. Actually, this is when it was still on Showtime, and so I had gotten The Return
Hmm.
I think I'd gotten it on Blu-ray, and I set it up so that they would play at the same time. I queued them up, and it does work. It's kind of weird.
Wow.
It's like
Now,
I don't think well, it's kind of like you'll have certain things like for example, I think probably the most notable thing, because if people have watched The Return, they'll know exactly what scenes I'm talking about. The scene the scene where um, Bob is being killed. Bob is
hmm,
being killed, and he and well, where the doppelganger Cooper is being killed, and Bob emerges out of his body like this black ball,
yeah,
and then attacks. Has to be dispatched by Freddy.
hmm,
The kid with the weird green super glove on.
right, yeah.
Okay, which I don't even know what the hell that was about. I mean, I
Neat.
still watch that. And it's like,
Yeah.
what is that? But anyway, so at the same time that you see that black ball emerge with the last episode, what's happened is that the the uh, the other version or yet another version of Cooper and Diane, who are staying at that motel where they have that weird sex, and then he wakes up and she's gone, and it's completely different. It's like the whole thing is
Right.
different. He can't figure out what's going on right before he drives into town and finds Judy's diner. Okay, and all that
Yeah.
stuff happens. But at the very same time, when that black ball is emerging out of the doppelganger's chest, you see him coming out of the motel after he's woken up. And there's the way the scene is shot, what you see is as he gets in his car, the camera kind of pulls back and you see one of the big, huge outdoor light fixtures, and it's this big white ball. So you have
Huh.
this black ball over here with Bob in it, and this white ball over here. And then the very next thing he's going to do is he's going to go to Judy's diner, and from there, from Judy's diner, um, he's going to find eventually the iteration of Laura Palmer as a result of that, right? As a
Yeah.
result of
Right.
that, as a result of that, and yet, and then in the other scene where Bob is killed, immediately after that, he goes down into the bowels. He goes down into the bowels of the Great Northern Motel, where they've detected this weird portal, and he goes into that portal, and from that portal he encounters Laura Palmer in the past and takes her away from being murdered. So in both
Oh.
of the ends of both of those sequences, he encounters Laura Palmer, or who Laura Palmer is in those realities. And one is in the past and one is in a parallel reality. And he brings them forward in a certain way. And in both those sequences, a Bob figure is killed. Freddie kills Bob. And then when he finds the Palmer kind of alternate in this other reality after encountering the people at Judy's diner, he goes into her house and he looks into another room because she's getting ready to go with him, and you see in there a dead body. She's put a bullet through this guy's head,
Yeah.
murdered somebody, and he looks just like Bob.
Wow.
It's very, I mean, go back and look at it. It's very, but that's happening at the same time in both, like the same sort of, if you play them side by side, it's very odd. And like I said, I don't know whether he planned that or whether it's just sort of one of those interesting patterns that emerges from his stuff, because that's part of it too. I mean, synchronicity is part of what he's about.
Yeah.
Happy accidents, as Bob Ross would have called them.
Right. Yeah, and I mean it's funny because he allows Cooper to be kind of the mouthpiece for that in Twin Peaks,
Right,
explaining like
exactly.
synchronicity and deciphering dream images and all of this stuff. And he comes off like kind of goofy and happy-go-lucky and just a likable guy in like the first
Right.
season, and that's where maybe Coo- Lynch is kind of giving away some of the secrets is by just having somebody kind of
Kind of
very
goofy like that.
happily. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but but you find that notion of synchronicity popping up in all of his other work too. It's just a little bit more subtle.
Right.
It has to do with you know, people finding themselves in certain places, and then all of a sudden this other thing happens. This
Hmm.
other thing happens. And according to people who worked with him on his films, he would incorporate things that just happened on set into especially if they were inspirational or meaningful in some way, into his uh into the film. That's how the character Bob was developed,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know.
Yeah, because he was like a sound technician on the set or something, or like one of the boom mic guys or something.
Well, yeah, and what happened is that there's that scene right at the end of the very first, what's the pilot episode, where at the very end, Laura Palmer's mother played by Grace Zabriskie, who has the creepiest faces. She can do the creepiest faces sometimes, but she's freaking out. She's had a dream and she's freaking out, and she starts screaming, and that's like the end of the pilot episode. But if you look, there's like a mirror behind her, and
Mm.
and apparently they accidentally caught a reflection of the guy Bob, who ended up playing Bob in that. You see his, and so they accidentally caught the reflection, and so they decided that instead of reshooting and going back, they decided we'll use that and see what happens to it. And then they reshot part of it so that he would be like in that he would be the one crouching behind. Originally, they were going to have, I guess, Leland crouching behind
Uh,
Laura's bed, and the guy who played Leland, but they reshot it and had him be there.
hmm.
So it's and they did that because of that mistake. Which, by the
Yeah,
way, Grace Zabriskie plays some of the. She does creepy so well.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean the guy that plays Bob is terrifying. Like the first time he shows up really in the show and you see him and he's like crawling over the bed and he's like got this wild expression on his face. He just like looks like a wild animal. It's just like
Right.
really scary.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's yeah. I mean, I think yeah.
I
Well,
can
and
only
then
imagine like straight laced TV watching audiences seeing that for the first time must like really freak people out. And you know, because I
well,
never watched it until later, but you know, it freaked me out.
right. Well,
Um,
and there's a scene. There's the at the first episode of the second season. Um, there is a highly edited shot depiction of when Laura is murdered in
yeah,
the railway car. And the way Lynch always does those kinds of murders is he does a lot of cutting and editing so that you see it from her perspective and then from Bob's perspective, like boom, 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 like that. And then
right.
he always uses sound effects. His sound effects
Mhm.
murder you.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's like, I think that's the part that most freaks me out about some of his horror sequences or his sound effects. Because even if you
Mm,
can close your eyes, you still hear it. You still like hear the knife entering someone. It's disturbing. But
yeah,
he's what he's doing is he's letting you understand how terrible it is, this terrible thing that's happening. But when I watch that sequence now, and then later on when Bob/Leland kills Maddie, by the way, I'm apologizing to all people who have not seen these things. These are all spoilers that were.
well, only kind of, because if they haven't seen it at all, they're like, what,
Yeah,
who,
yeah.
how are you gonna
What the hell are you talking about? But the scene where Leland Bob kills Maddie, both of
yeah,
those scenes, when I watch them now, I can only imagine how disturbing they were to audiences because that was not something that was shown on television at the time.
yeah, right.
I
I
mean,
mean,
at
because
all,
like
at all.
1990, 91 was it, or
Yeah,
90?
91,
Yeah,
92. I mean,
right.
you did not portray murder like that, especially of young women.
Yeah,
I
and this
mean,
was a huge show. I mean, it really took off. Like people wouldn't stop talking about it back then. So,
Yeah,
um,
I can remember. I mean, I remember it being talked about, and I had to sort of wait because I didn't have a TV, so
right.
I couldn't watch it at the time. So I had to wait
Yeah,
until it was available in other places to see that.
yeah. I will say, since you mentioned Firewalk with Me, the beginning of that movie, I think, is one of the coolest things ever filmed. Like the whole little story with Chris Isaac and
Right.
uh, what's his butt? The
What's
was it
his
Kiefer
butt?
Sutherland?
Yes.
Yeah, and then they meet David Lynch as Cole at the airport, and he's got his father's sister's girl, or
Yeah, and
Lil,
and
yeah,
the blue rose girl. Yeah.
right, yeah, Lil, and she's wearing a
Lil.
sour face.
Yeah,
Like,
she's wearing a
that
sour
that
face.
whole scene to me, that's like one of the most beautiful things ever filmed. He does this weird thing where he puts his hand over his head and his fingers down over his eyes, and he's making the. And then
Oh,
as they're driving away, Chris Isaac explains like the insane encoding of messaging that happened in that one scene. None of it
yeah.
makes any sense, really. But he's just saying it very straightforward, like this is an episode of Dragnet or something. You
Right.
know?
Uh, yeah. Well, and there are just, yeah, and then that scene, I think it's in The Return. Yeah, it's got to be in The Return, where they go into David Lynch's office, and he's Gordon Cole, and
Yeah,
he's sitting here like this, like all leaning
right,
back, and he's whistling in this strange way, and there's this big picture of the nuclear explosion at Los Alamos behind.
right.
And he's just sitting there whistling. It's so,
Yeah,
I don't know. There's something about that picture that I just remember.
yeah. And that's the thing is like he's really good at throwing absurdity at you in a way that's both funny and sometimes simultaneously funny and disturbing, where it's really black comedy.
It
It,
is. It's
like
very, very much.
and but again, that's just another wild juxtaposition where he does that so well. Like, is there so much goofy, funny stuff in Twin Peaks for how disturbing the story is, and a lot of things that seem like incongruities, but they work together well when you're already charmed by the characters and their weird, quirky little attributes that you'll accept a character like the log lady without questioning it too hard. And
I th I think the log lady is brilliant. In fact,
yeah,
I think one of the worst things that was done to the streaming version of Twin Peaks is that they took the log lady intros out.
oh, all right,
And so I know like a bunch of young people who have seen Twin Peaks, but they have not seen the log lady intros. And I'm like, oh my God, you have to see the log lady intros because she's kind of like her own version of a Greek chorus, right at the very beginning of all of
yeah,
that. And
that's a really cool way to put it. Yeah, and she's
and she
also like she's also kind of like an oracle. She's like
she
this
she
weird
is an
kind.
oracle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And she has her own kind of way of both addressing what has been done so far and yet telling you what's going to happen, but it's done in such a way that it's not obvious what the action's going to be. It's just,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and but it's an introduction to the kind of the feeling of it, the
Yeah.
feeling of the episode.
Now, see, like, I think this is all so important to people like you and I who are looking at the phenomena and like UFOs and paranormalia, because like this kind of dream logic and absurdity and juxtaposition and like speaking in bizarre code through acted out messages and stuff like that is really kind of in a lot of ways like how the phenomena operates, you know?
Absolutely. That is how it operates.
So if you
That
want
that
to
is
speak to the,
that is
yeah,
exactly how it operates.
right.
Um, um, well, just I mean, the example that comes to mind, and this is something that people can look up if they want to. Um, it's just a really good example of what we just talked about. If you are familiar with the contactee Dorothy Izot,
Hmm.
who of which a documentary was made about her like in 2006, 2007, and you can get it on Amazon Prime,
Hmm.
um, and look at it. But there is a sequence, for people who don't know who she was, because a lot of people in the paranormal community don't know who she was. She passed not that long ago. She had to have been over 100 or something when she died. But for several decades, she took film and video of lights that she saw around the house in which she lived and other light phenomena that would occur in her home. And she's not the only one who experienced this stuff. Her daughters experienced this stuff, but some of her film is really kind of amazing.
Okay.
It's really interesting. And she had at one point a base, I guess, Hynek came and visited her and looked at her film at the time that she had done at this time by that time, and he told her to keep doing it, but don't share it widely with the larger UFO community because they'll wreck the process, they'll tear it apart. All right. But there's this one sequence in the documentary where the documentarians are just trying to get kind of the story from her family and from her daughter in particular, her oldest daughter, about some of the experiences that she had with her mother. So the daughter is in the kitchen. It's nighttime. She's sitting up against. She's standing up with the window to the back. It's dark outside, so it's the kitchen window. She's just sitting here talking, and they just film her telling a story about her mother and some of the, when these experiences started and what her experience of her mother was. I mean, it's the dialogue is very normal. And then all of a sudden, as she's talking, outside in the air behind her, a light pops on. A light pops on. And the light moves to the left, and then it moves to the right behind her head, and then it comes all the way over here. And if you watch it really closely, I mean, the film is going, so it's moving pretty quickly. It's not until they noticed, nobody noticed it until they took the film home and processed it and were looking at it, to edit it and eventually show it to the family. Yeah. And then they noticed this and they slowed it down and they like blew it up. And what it is, especially when it's over here, what it is in fact, it's not just a light. It's an oblong shape with several lights going on really quickly, so fast that unless you slow it down, you can't see it. Like with your naked eye, you can't see it. But when it's going like this, and it very much looks like a mechanical object. It's very bizarre. And
almost like a spinning flying saucer with lights, or
very much. Well, and then you find out that the place where it happened, it couldn't have been a reflection because that window didn't have a pane in it. It was open. And it didn't have a pane or anything. And the direction that it was coming from was not a place where there were no light. There's no place where that could have been like anything else. It couldn't have been like cars or reflection or anything like that. In fact, when they show this to the family and they blow it up, like two of the guys in the family who are the skeptics, they jump in their car and they race to see if there's any way that these lights could have been produced in some other fashion, and there isn't. So there's something very symbolic about that. It's like they don't know exactly what was happening, but this woman is talking about her mother and her experiences, and this stuff shows up over here. And it's whatever the phenomenon are, and I think that I personally think there's more than one kind.
Yeah.
Whatever they are, the way they communicate to us is through highly symbolic means. And I do think I mean, my experience with it is that can come in waking visions or dreams, or in addition to just stuff that happens in real life to people that then cannot be easily explained.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would agree with all of that. It's a matter of perception, I guess, and just being being there to witness it, and having the eyes to see, as it were. Being
Yeah,
able to communicate some of these things. I
right.
did want to mention, since you brought up Dorothy Izot, the Blue Rose, to
Yes.
me, that name just that was the name of the ministries that was run by the Reverend Bob Short, who was like one of the original contactees. Like he was right
Uh-huh.
there with Van Tassel and stuff. And I never knew if Lynch was making a direct reference with that, or if Mark Frost had made the reference, or if that's just a weird coincidence,
Yeah, I don't, that is something I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know whether he might have, that might have been. Um, that's interesting because actually I didn't know that.
yeah. I feel
And
like I'm the only one that's ever picked up on that. But they reference Project Blue Book in the show. Um,
right, right,
yeah.
exactly. Well, and Twin Peaks itself, I know I've mentioned this in other shows. Twin Peaks itself is based, the whole sort of conceit of it, of the murder of a young woman and all of that, that is based on an actual unsolved murder case
Hmm.
that happened, that Mark Frost knew about, that he grew up with, that happened just north of me in Troy, New York. The murder of Drew Hazel, or Hazel Drew, sorry. And her murder has never been solved, but there, because of the nature of that murder, um, uh, all kinds of ghost stories
Yeah.
developed around there. And Mark Frost grew up with those ghost stories. And so that's an element that he brought into as part of the narrative feature of Twin Peaks. So even that story is based on a ghost story.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. And I
based.
mean, I feel like some of this stuff is intentional and some of it's not. And like, I think David Lynch had a way of tapping into um, the happenstance in a way, like where something would, if it happened for a reason. So we have to include it somehow.
Right.
Um, but that ends up tapping into just weird synchronicities with the stuff. And I think that happens with all good creative efforts, like
Hmm.
all valid
Hmm.
creative efforts in some way or another are going to be part of that spider web of meaning that exists out there.
That's a good
Um,
way of putting it. Spreader web of meaning.
but Lynch was particularly adept at it. Like he was very good at editing in such a way, editing reality. Really, is kind of what he's doing. Like it's a movie. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but I mean, just an example of that. I found an old UFO zine in a bookstore once, um, and it was like Max Miller's old zine that was just called Saucers, and the picture on the cover is a flying saucer photo that was taken near Twin Peaks, and the place was called Twin Peaks. I think it was somewhere in California, and I
Hmm.
was just like, Twin Peaks. Wait, what? And then like
What?
looking at it, I'm like, this was published in 1955. Like, what?
It, it, uh, I
And
bet, yeah,
there's no way
yeah,
they knew about this one little like weird saucer zine that was independently published in 1955 and
yeah.
like
But
incorporated.
you see something
Right.
like that, and it makes your hair stand up.
Yeah.
It's like, ah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and then
So,
you get into like the Mike Clelland kind of stuff with owls and the UFOs and what
oh
owls
yeah,
kind of represent in mythology, their association with like conspiracy theories around Illuminati, because the original Illuminati used it as a symbol and stuff like that.
well, and
Um,
then when he says the owls are not what they seem,
yeah,
that whole thing, the owls are not what they seem.
yeah,
Um, Well, people that he knew, or like, well, for example, like many who know about him know that he loved The Wizard of Oz, that
yeah,
was like one of his favorite movies. He also really loved, I can't now I can't remember what the movie was, but the movie that has a character in it, of Gordon Cole.
yeah. They play a little sound clip of it in The Return. There's a part where,
Right.
yeah, Laurel
And,
Palmer's there's watching TV, and she's watching that one scene where somebody's like, "Where's Gordon Cole?" Yeah,
yeah, that wakes Doogie up.
right, yeah,
The trapped Cooper is
right,
awakened because of that. Because Gordon Cole,
yeah,
and So he clearly referenced things well, and then the person, if you remember in the return, the guy who is the owner of the insurance agency where Dougie works, his name is
Hmm.
Bushnell. Well, Bushnell Keeler, I think that was his last name, was the man who uh, introduced David Lynch, a young David Lynch, to what he called the art life.
Hmm.
That
Right.
inspired him. He was the father of a friend of his, and who had inspired him to become a painter. And his name was
Hmm.
Bushnell. So that's where that name comes from. So he is always referencing things that are meaningful to him, things that had an impact on him in one way or another. Um, so he draws from all of these different things, and he sort of reassembles them and puts them together, um, in a new pattern.
Yeah. Yeah, and unabashedly too, where like the Oz thing. For listeners, there's a whole documentary called Lynch slash Oz.
Uh-huh.
It's phenomenal. You hear a bunch of different directors talking about the influence of the Wizard of Oz on Lynch's works, but kind of how it impacted their work as well. And you see this all kind of as a continuous narrative tradition, really, in cinema that that's carried through the works of Lynch to other directors now, um,
Right.
which is a damn cool thing. I think it's at its most obvious in Wild at Heart. There's a lot of really direct references to the Wizard of Oz.
Right. No,
Like,
yeah, there is. I mean, that's what makes that movie fun.
yeah,
That movie is that movie. Like I told you, that movie is problematic for me because it's actually fun in a lot of ways
right.
and really funny, but
Yeah, Nicolas Cage being Elvis is just kind of
yeah, but it's so violent that I have trouble
yeah,
watching it.
right,
It's so violent that I have, it's like, ugh.
right,
But it is. I think it probably, I agree with you. It probably encapsulates a certain aspect of of the different parts of Lynch. Like in his
yeah,
book Room to Dream, one of the things he talks about is that when he looked back at his life, he realized that as a teenager, he had like these three different sides to himself. There was the person who was the kid, that wanted to be, that was the family kid, that
mhm,
loved his family, and because he had a good family, he was raised with lots of love. He had almost a bucolic childhood, and
mhm,
he talks about that. So there was that part of him that wanted to be part of his family, and then there was the part of him that wanted to be a painter
yeah,
and wanted that creative life. And then there was another part of him that was exploring things like, kind of wanted to be a wild kid.
right,
So he was exploring sex, and he experimented a little bit with drugs, and he never got himself into any really bad trouble,
mhm,
but he had these like three sides to himself, and as he puts it in the book, and I wanted them clearly demarcated from each other, in very
right,
different realms, right? But obviously eventually you can't do that. It's like
yeah,
it's all coming from you. So that's part of where I think he gets his tendency sometimes. This is very clear in Inland Empire, and certainly clear in Mulholland Drive, where you have one character, but all of a sudden you see them going off in different places with different names. You see
that's super interesting.
these kind
Yeah,
of these different realities, these possibilities of what might happen if you go down this direction. Well, and that's implied in the return too, because
mhm,
what Agent Cooper's big mistake is that he thinks he can control all this,
yeah, yep.
and he
Well,
fails.
Agent Cooper's the fool of the tarot deck in a
Right.
lot of ways, and he starts out thinking he has all the knowledge already. Yeah, it's wow, that's really wild too. And like Oz, the Oz and Kansas dichotomy is like a huge thing. Um, the way you see the same characters that were on the farm, or the mean old lady that's trying to take Toto away,
Right.
and
Right. Exactly.
how they appear in in this like other world of Oz, you know. And
Right.
I think it's interesting too that um, L. Frank Baum was a theosophist. He was a member of the
Right.
Theosophical Society, and I think
Right.
he worked theosophical ideas into the books at least.
He did. Yeah.
Some of which would have translated into the movie naturally, even though the movie has notable differences from the book.
Right.
Um, One thing that documentary really did was point out some of the allusions to the Wizard of Oz that I never would have picked up on, like the ruby slippers. It's like
Yes.
anytime you see somebody with red shoes in one of David Lynch's works, something's about to happen, and you're
Right.
like, wow, okay, I never picked up on that before, but now it really makes sense, you know?
Right. Well, and he has this whole thing about women in stilettos and
Yeah.
and beautiful women too. I mean,
Hmm.
he loved beautiful women.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
mean, he
Yeah.
really does. And that becomes really clear in all of
Yeah.
his shows. He just really loves beautiful women. Um, and he talks about like when he was a teenager, you know, he always had one special woman, a young woman that he dated, but then they both would date lots of other people. So he wasn't a going steady type,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. I mean, well, that thing kind of hit me too because it wasn't just women. It's like when David Bowie shows up as Philip Jeffries in Fire Walk with Me, he's wearing red shoes. He's got this white
Right.
suit on and red
In red
shoes.
shoes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then he starts saying, I'm not gonna tell you about Judy."
We're not going to talk about Judy.
Right, and you get these references to characters named Judy that you never see because of Judy Garland, which is just
Yes.
like, oh shit, and it's like I let Lynch's stuff just wash over me a lot, and then and you think, okay, well, it's all open to interpretation. He doesn't want you to he doesn't want you to like ascribe his own specific meaning to it. But then when you see these patterns, you're like, God damn it, should have seen that. But to the point where after I watched this documentary, I was at a fast food joint. I was driving somewhere and had to stop for food, and the man in front of me in line was wearing these bright red sneakers. And I
Ah!
was like, "Uh-oh." Like the hackles went up a little bit. I'm like, "What's about to happen?"
It's like all of a sudden you're going to see those wavy lines, those
Yeah.
wavy lines on the floor, and then the red curtain's going to open.
Oh man, is my hamburger gonna start talking to me when I
Well, and I've had really weird Lynchian moments too. Like I this happened like maybe it was during the pandemic. Oh, what was it? It was yeah, it was during when I started commuting back to work during you know, as the pandemic was closing. There's this there's this place where have to go across the Hudson River to go through Poughkeepsie to get to my job. And
Mhm.
it's the Mid Hudson Bridge. And this is one of the bridges. All the bridges that are across the Hudson are bridges that people routinely, I mean, and it's kind of terrifying, jump off of to commit
Yeah,
suicide.
right.
Um, and I was as I was approaching the bridge, a lot of times, unless there's something else going on, they'll have a sign there that says something like, your life matters. You know, call
Yeah.
988, that kind of stuff. Your life matters. And as I was driving down, I was listening to a song, and um, the song had a lyric in it that said something about no life mattering or something. So as I was driving down, just as I saw that sign and it flashed, all lives matter, the song said, no lives matter. It happened at exactly the same time.
Oh,
And I thought
jeez.
to myself,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess those are the two choices, aren't they?
Yeah. Those are the two opposite pieces. Yeah.
Those are the two choices, you know. So,
Uh,
you know, I have a well, your people aren't going to see this, but I have a sign up here that just will you see this?
nice.
Dave,
Yeah, they make the decals that say
yes,
directed by David
yes.
Lynch now that you can put
Yeah,
on your
the
window.
decal is on my
Yeah.
car.
There you go.
It's
Um,
placed in such a way that I can look at it looking out so
yeah.
that it's like everything I see has been directed by David Lynch.
Um, one thing I did kind of want to bring up with this kind of like symbolism that I find is really interesting about the Wizard of Oz and as it applies to Lynch and all of this stuff is just kind of the story of that movie outside of the movie, because we're talking about like the book by Baum and the slippers. In the book they
Mhm.
were silver slippers, not ruby.
Right.
So it's that's one of those things that got changed in the movie, but then
Mhm.
also the movie wasn't like the big blowout phenomena that people kind of assume it was because it
Uh,
became so
it-
classic,
yeah, at the
right?
time it wasn't. At the time it
uh,
wasn't. Yeah.
so in the documentary they kind of mentioned that like the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow gets used as a musical motif in a lot of movies around that time because what didn't like cost a ton of money to get it, or it wasn't so tied to Wizard of Oz,
Right.
uh, because that wasn't such a huge hit, and it was in well a lot of like early film noir movies, which is
Uh-huh.
really kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And then Wizard of Oz kind of building a following because it got shown on holidays. Like for a
Right.
while, it was shown always on Easter, and then it eventually became Thanksgiving, I think.
Yeah, I
Um,
could that's when I remember seeing it.
yeah. So I mean, it's this evolution of a narrative and how it takes a different shape and form for different people at different times that
Right.
I think is like super interesting when you have like 100 years of a story, because I think it was originally written in well the early part of the 20th century anyway.
I think it was the
So
1890s is when it was
yeah,
first, or at least the first volumes of it were published. Yeah, I
right.
mean, and the other thing about it too is that when the first version of it that came out was edited because there were like two or three sequences in the movie that were considered to be too terrifying. And
Yeah,
so they edited them. One was the sequence of when when the Wicked Witch first shows up and there's that fireball,
yeah,
and the woman, the actress who played the witch, she got actually burned for
yeah,
real, like really badly in
right.
that. But apparently when they first shot it, they it was too they kept in some of the graphic nature of what happened because she actually really screamed, and
Yeah,
they kept that in, and it was, which is rude to begin with, but they had to cut part of that and edit it.
yeah,
And another thing that they edited was the tornado sequence, because
yeah,
apparently the original tornado sequence was so terrifying to people. I have the unedited version. You can get the unedited version
huh,
of it's been which has had some of that stuff restored. And because I was curious as to what they edited out, and and I wanted to see that tornado sequence because for it's actually a pretty well done
yeah. It's convincing.
tornado,
Yeah,
for the time period. They came up with a really good kind of prop way of doing it, and the original sequence is pretty scary. If you've ever been in a tornado, I was watching it and I was like, oh my God.
oh yeah. I was about to say if you've ever actually seen one before,
Yeah,
then
or if you've been one, like I've been in one, like coming towards the house, it's like,
yeah.
I can see why people would be completely freaked out about
I
that.
only got that close once in Pennsylvania. A tornado tore through when we were camping, and I could see it in the distance, and it looked just like the Wizard of Oz. It looked just
Yeah.
like that scene. I was like, "Wow, this is scary," you know.
Yeah, they did a really good job of figuring out how to. I mean, and I mean, I don't know if you know how they figured out a way of using a weighted a silk stocking,
Yeah.
and whirling it in a certain way. And I don't know exactly how they manipulated it, but it's to me, it's actually, because it's an actual object whirling, it's
Hmm.
it still is better than any of the CGI tornadoes I've ever seen
Oh yeah.
in terms of, being realistic. But
I love those practical effects for sure. Yeah, but
well, and also I think that my understanding of when the Wizard of Oz first came out, it was released right as war was beginning to break out
yeah,
in
1938, I
Europe
think.
in 1938, right before, the invasion of Poland. And so it reflects a lot of that tension And it was kind of seen as a scary movie by a lot of people.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
I can see why.
at the time, which is why
Yeah.
it wasn't as popular, I think, as it became later on.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then people are looking at it with rose tinted goggles, like later on, So, but yeah, I mean, then the added layer of that is the reality of it with like Judy Garland's life story as a
Yeah.
child actress that, and her rocky journey through Hollywood and stardom. Uh, so, I mean, there's so many layers to that for David Lynch to draw on, which is just a super interesting thing. So I can't recommend the documentary enough
Yeah,
because it'll really make you look at it. Everything you look at everything differently after that.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, that's something I had not been able to watch before we
Right.
started talking, so that
Yeah.
I'm going to watch that.
And it has John Waters talking about David Lynch, and I could listen to John Waters talk probably for like an hour and not get sick of it. So,
He's terribly interesting. Yes,
yeah.
he's got.
Now, one thing that we didn't get to yet, and I definitely want to before we run out of time here, is the Transcendental Meditation is a
Oh
huge part of
yes,
Lynch's story, and you actually took his what was it, the master class, or what is
yes,
that? Yeah.
yeah. There's that platform that you can subscribe to online that's called Masterclass, and in it, depending on like what you're interested in, whether it's cooking or a skill or other creative things. Like I joined it during the beginning of the pandemic because I needed, while I was doing other things like job hunting and stuff, I needed something to listen to that would sort of, I like to listen to creative people talk. Like one of the things I really love is listening to directors and actors talk about their craft, because that is one
Hmm.
thing I don't do. I do many things, um, but like you, I've written a lot. I've written poetry. I've written short stories. That's sort of where I have focused a lot of my creative attention, is writing. But I love to know how actors do things, because acting is like, to me what actors do is remarkable. It's
Yeah.
it's it's like the most amazing thing. I don't know how they do it. I really don't, but I love to listen to them talk about how they do it. So I wanted
Hmm.
to listen to Helen Mirren talk about her stuff. I wanted to listen, and David Lynch he talked about being a director and about the process of creativity. And as part of that process, a lot of his masterclass is about TM, and it's about his meditative practice and how important that is for his ability to, as he put it in other places, catch the big fish.
Yeah.
it's,
Right.
it's part,
Yeah.
part of how he put it, catch the big fish. So he talks about, and there's like a whole sequence in there. It's like if you subscribe to it, you you watch the episodes, the classes, and then there are these extra little things that he did. And so he did like 15 or 20 minutes on transcendental meditation. He doesn't teach you the technique because he's not a transcendental meditation teacher, but he does describe it, and he describes what he did,
Hmm.
and how he did it. And transcendental meditation is a very simple form of meditation. I mean, I guess we would call it a mantra form of
Yeah.
meditation.
I mean,
Basic,
it's simple but really effective.
right. Well, and and especially if it resonates with you. I mean, my form of meditation is a little bit different than that, but he he talks about, obviously he doesn't tell you the syllable he was given, because everybody's given a separate syllable
Hmm.
from the Sanskrit language or word to focus on, and you focus on the sound of it, what the sound of it is, and you let the sound of it resonate in you,
Yeah.
and then you let it take you where it takes you. And so he described the process of how it originally, it caused him to literal, as he puts it, he dropped down and down and down and down and down in an elevator. It's kind of like going down into the depths. And he experienced what he calls the universal mind or the universal unified field. That's how he
Yeah.
described it. And from that place, these images come up. And it's like being in a dream world, and these images come up, and then those images stay with you, and you work with those images to see, as he put it, to see where they show up in your life, to see where they connect with other things. You let the image and the emotion connected to that image take you somewhere, take you where it goes. I mean, there's this one sequence in The Return where he has a dream. He talks about how he's in a dream having a coffee with
Yeah.
that famous actress, whoever her name is, that famous French actress, and she's got her hand in a mudra. I don't know if
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
she's got her hand in a mudra, and she's talking about how we're all in a dream. This is all a dream.
Right.
And that's a dream that he's sharing with other people. And in the background there's this picture of over kind of superimposed on it, this picture of Agent Cooper just there having,
Yeah.
so to me it's like a central part of that whole show is just that right there. um but he got those images and how they connected to his dreams. He got that from his meditation practice, which apparently he did twice a day religiously for decades after he was exposed to it,
Yeah.
every
Yeah. I
single day.
remember seeing him respond in some interview somewhere. He was like, I haven't missed a meditation since 1972. You know? Yeah.
You imitated him really well, by the way.
Oh, I've been doing that for a long time. I was kind of making fun of him a little bit during the return because my wife was getting frustrated with the lack of actual Cooper in the return, and like,
Oh,
so I was watching it by myself pretty much. And then there's a scene where there's a scene in one episode where they're just playing the song "Green Onions" by Booker
yes.
T and the MGs, and
Uh-huh.
somebody's just mopping the floor, and it's the whole
Yes,
song.
that yes, and that's such a brilliant. He's just, yeah, and you hear the guy in the background going. He's talking about how he owes me for two.
Right.
He owes me for
Yeah.
two.
Basically, nothing happens in that scene. It's just a
Yeah.
guy mopping and a guy counting the register down and
Well, yeah,
green onion.
and he's talking on the phone,
Right.
explaining to this guy that he has to pay him for the two grade A high school horrors that he.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I watched this scene and I was like, this is where like the old me comes back, where I'm like, come on, David Lynch, what are you doing? So I was making fun of him, and I was just like, I had always wanted to film a scene where someone just mops the floor and Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs plays. And I did that same imitation for my friend SJ, and they told me that he actually said that exact thing in an interview once. He was like,
Oh,
I just always
really?
wanted to film this scene. I always had it in my head that somebody should be mopping a floor while Green Onions plays.
Well,
And I finally was,
they're actually sweeping the floor.
was it sweeping? Okay.
They're actually sweeping the floor. You
Well,
know.
whatever the case, that was something he always wanted to do. And then he just like got a chance to do it. And I said it in a way just to like make fun of him. And I was like, well, I guess I tapped into something there. But I don't know. Like, it's kind of funny because it seems like even just talking to you now, I feel like I find things that I had in common with them that I didn't even really know.
Right.
But and TM is one of them. I mean, when I was a teenager, I knew a girl that introduced me to a whole lot of things. She's the one that got me into like tarot and punk rock and a whole lot of other stuff. But she was learning TM, and her teacher, I guess, had given her permission to give me a Sanskrit syllable because I couldn't go to the teacher directly for whatever reason. They were kind of far away. Um, I guess she was given permission to give me one, and I still know it. Like, I know it in my head, and I used to do it pretty regular, and I would get those kinds of images and stuff. So I guess this stuff has a way of overlapping where every once in a while I still do, and I do different kinds of meditation now, but yeah, it's kind of wild. And that was one of those things that with mysticism in general was eye-opening for me, because this friend that had given me a syllable to use for TM said that I wasn't allowed to tell anybody what it was. And I said, okay.
Mhm.
And she goes, I mean, I'll tell you mine. I don't care. And she did. And then her teacher cut her off. She went back
Ah,
for more lessons, and the teacher was like, I told you not to tell anybody what your syllable was, and you did. Like, I know that you did. So I'm not going to teach you any further because you can't follow directions. And she was like heartbroken about it. But I
well,
was like,
how did he know?
yeah, how did this person know? I think it was a woman that taught her, but I'm not sure. It was some ashram out in Western Mass that she would go to, but it was just like, um, or the pagoda of some kind. But uh, uh, I think it was associated with Ram Dass, and
Mm.
George Harrison used to go there, whatever this place was. But but yeah, that blew my mind. I'm like, there's no way for them to have known that she told me this.
Or
But
no logical way.
right,
I mean,
yeah,
part of the reason why I followed the spiritual path that I follow is because because it was a series of dreams that led me to it. And
yeah,
it was a series of really bizarre synchronistic experiences that included the only experiences of honest to God, person to person telepathy I have ever encountered. So my reaction to all that was, oh, there's something to this, whatever
yeah,
it is, you know.
right,
And it isn't what he did, but I have some of the same kinds of experiences with what I do. You know, I'm given information about things that I should do. I'm given information about, well, like the state of the world
hmm,
right now. I'm given information about how to proceed, how to help other people, things to say. There's, you know, I think that I mean, and we talked before we got into this about, you know, the Seth material and how this might overlap with some of the Seth material, because there are some concepts that are similar between what Lynch does, you know, from the kind of the spiritual underpinning of what he does, or metaphysical underpinning of what he does, and some of the ideas in Seth, like simultaneous time,
yeah,
multiple lives, the importance of synchronicity, the importance of emotion
hmm,
in influencing events, and desire in influencing events. Um, all of these things are things that overlap with ideas that you'll find in the Seth material. But to me, what it really comes down to, and I think, and I know this sounds so bizarre, because what I experience at the very foundation of what everything Lynch is doing is love. It's a kind of interesting love about that depth, about those symbols, about the creative process. And he does talk about that in that masterclass, about how the core of everything is this kind of, and I know it sounds so sappy, universal love, you know, but it's a
hmm,
love that can somehow, it's not, there's nothing sappy about it. It's a love that can somehow hold all things. I mean, even things that we would normally consider to be evil or bad or dark or scary, that somehow some of those things emerge out of the same kind of, you know, they may twist themselves because of the experiences of people, or we may misinterpret some of them. But at the bottom of the unified field that he's talking about, at least from him, is this love for these things. And so underneath all that, there is a love. And that's why I think that, you know, he does things like, there's a kind of rough justice in his films. People are violent, but people who are truly villains, they kind of get theirs.
yeah,
You
usually,
know, they kind of get theirs. They kind of die the way they've treated other people. He likes real love stories to resolve in a happy way.
yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah.
he really does, you
He likes
know.
that storybook ending, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, or even though he knows there's this dark part of it. And when he, like in Blue Velvet, when he shows that bizarre DS sadistic relationship between, the Dennis Hopper character and the
Yeah.
Isabella character, he understands that behind that there is this weird love between the two of them,
Yeah.
even if it's terrifying to watch what the outcome of that is. And that's why she doesn't want what the Kyle MacLachlan character wants to give her. She doesn't
Right.
want it. You
Yeah,
know,
and he's an outsider looking in. He's the innocent kid wandering into kind of like really dark territory where he doesn't belong, you know?
right, right. And he thinks that the love that he has is the love that she wants, but they
Yeah.
both want love.
Yeah.
That's the love is undergirding all of that. And I think that that's part of what makes people uncomfortable is that, these deep desires and these longings that we have that kind of join, sex and violence and love and all these things together. Um, it's difficult when we're facing that in ourselves. Well, first of all, to know what the hell to do with it, but also a lot of people don't want to face that in themselves. They don't want. I mean, what's going on with some people in the world right now is this desire to try to create a world that they think everybody should have.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
it's first of all, it's never going to be that way. That's not the way reality is. It's never
Yeah.
going to happen. I mean, every attempt to do this, it's what cults attempt to do. You
Hmm.
you encounter the reality of the world and it freaks you out, and so you gravitate towards trying to control the fear by tamping everything down. What he does is he just first of all shows that's crazy, but also just he releases it. It's just like boom, here it is, you know.
Yeah. And paradoxically, through the control he exerts as the director with
Oh,
like
right,
a final cut
exactly.
on it, you know?
Well, you've got to have some control to create a product, you know what I mean? It,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Um, no, I mean, yeah, that's all fantastic. It's a great way to look at it because I mean, there is David Lynch, the personality, and then there's the work. And I mean, if you're to watch something super violent in one of his movies or really scary in one of his movies, um, you might get some weird ideas about who the director is. And then you see him in an interview; he's always really likable, and his passion and energy, and I mean, even when he's inscrutable, that just comes off as absurd and kind of funny, you know.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. I mean,
um,
one of his friends described him as Jimmy Stewart from Mars.
that's perfect. Yeah. But I love that stuff. And I mean, during the pandemic, I mean, that's come up a couple times now in the conversation via our relationship to the work. But David Lynch was on Twitter every day doing
Yes,
weather reports, you know,
yes.
and
It's
and there's so many great ones. And even just things he would tweet. Like I saw this shared after he was dead, a series of tweets, one on a Friday and one on a Sunday. And what the Friday one just said, I think this weekend I'm going to find out if I'm connected to the moon. And then the Sunday one says, pretty sure I'm connected to the moon.
oh God,
Yeah.
I mean, oh
But yeah, there's a lot of eerie stuff with it that always just, I think he's able to meet most people where they are in some way or another, as long as at some point in their life they're ready to accept um, that kind of dark mirror or I guess funhouse mirror version of what everything really is, what we
well,
all really are. You know?
what we really are. What
Yeah,
you have to be able to accept that in yourself.
yeah,
Be willing to see it.
right. And it's a little puppet theater, but there's you know the hands are attached to somebody, and it's all very real ultimately. You know.
Yeah, I mean, what it reminds me of is, I mean, I'm sure you know, in the Kabbalistic tree of life, you have, you have the Sphirot, so you
Hmm.
can have all these different meditations that kind of go with that. But then there's the Klipot, the tree of knowledge. And
Yes.
and so you have certain people like, Kenneth Grant who have taken you through the tunnels, and you have all these different things. So it was maybe about, I don't know, maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, I decided, I had gone through the regular tree of life. I decided I would use all of the different sources available to me and for a year, I would concentrate on the Klipot
Hmm.
and go through all those meditations. And what I found so disturbing is that while I had had difficulty with certain of the meditations of the Sphirot, I had no difficulty with any of them on the Klipot. It was like I'd get instructions, I'd go right in, boom, right
Yeah.
in. I'd have these weird experiences, I'd like, and it was like, why is it that the Klipot seems more natural to me than the Sphirot? What does that say about me?
Yeah.
I'm not
What does
sure.
that say about, yeah.
And the conclusion that I drew from that is that I have never bought the external view of things. I've
Yeah.
just this I don't relate to it. I've never bought it. I'm one of these people that I look at out my backyard, and you see the backyard, and it's got all this beautiful grass and these trees, and you hear the crickets, and it looks very bucolic in the summertime, and all I'm thinking about is all the bugs who are eating each other. That's literally when I hear
Right.
everything, I hear all the bugs. It's like this is just a realm of hungry mouths.
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
that's what I see. I have to pull back and see the beauty. It's like,
Yeah, and I guess the ultimate aim is to just synthesize those things, right? Like just
exactly.
you put them together and square those opposites so that's the I think that's probably what you would see if you find that unified field at the bottom, you know.
Yeah, is that they
Yeah.
both they both emerge. They are both there. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground. We've been
uh,
talking for a while. We could probably talk forever on this, but yeah, the a lot of esoterica around David Lynch that is um I actually got chills a couple of times in this conversation
oh,
because I'm like,
really?
this
Wow.
is all just making too much sense to me, you know? So I thank you so much for coming on to talk with me about this. It was kind of a short notice thing because like within a week or two of his passing, I was poking you on Messenger and being like, "You
Right.
want to come on?" So
Yeah, well, actually, it's helped a lot. I mean, I do actually. I mean, I have to say that his death. I feel like this sounds so. I say this and I sound so egotistical, but I don't mean it in an egotistical way. I really feel like a geis. Do you know what a geis is? It's
um, I know the term, but
it's a Celtic term, and
okay.
it means like, if a geis has been laid on you, that means you've been given a task.
Hmm.
Something has been, it's like you've been given a message and you need to do something. And I do feel like a geis was laid on me, because of the synchronicity surrounding his death. And it has to do with me focusing a lot more on my creative processes, which I have been sort of ignoring.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So it's kind of a get to work.
yeah, it's because he was such a work dog. He was always doing stuff. Even when he wasn't doing films, he was painting, and
Yeah,
because that was his first love. He was painting, and he was all and doing music. He was always involved in that kind of thing.
right.
So, you know,
But he also loved all of it. I mean, in
he
a way,
loved all of it. Yes,
he was always fishing, you know.
he
So,
was always fishing, looking for the big fish.
yep, yep. All right. Well, I mean, yeah, this has been a wonderful chat. So, if people want to find you online and read some of your work, I would highly recommend Professor Wham's YouTube and website, which if you go to one, you'll find the other. I think.
Right, right.
But
It's professorwham.com.
ProfessorWham.com. Yeah, and I mean, you have a lot of great stuff up there. And we've actually had a couple synchronicities between us recently too, because we both talked about the David Enigma in videos like pretty much at the same time.
Right. Right. That's true. That's true. That's very
Yeah,
interesting. It's true. And those are weird cases, man. Mm,
yeah, absolutely. So definitely go check out the. You can either read. Well, what's really cool about what you do is that you can either read it or watch a video, and you can. Well, for a lot of them, you have a transcript and a video where you read it. So it's
right.
yeah, I think that's awesome because people have options. I know a lot of people have a hard time reading things on a screen. I'm kind of
Right.
I'm kind of there. If it's a little too long, sometimes I can't. I can do like a page or two, but then my eyes start bugging out on me. So
Right. Well, and I do various of the blogs in different ways, but it's a lot of times the audio version will have like additional material and some visuals, and I'll ad lib
right,
stuff
yeah,
that comes
yeah,
up, as it occurs to me. So
yeah,
stuff you can't do in print. So
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think listeners to this show, if they haven't already, will very much enjoy your YouTube channel and your website because it's a lot of fascinating stuff. And as I said at the top, you're one of my favorite people to read and listen to. So
well, thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate that.
of course. So thanks so much for coming on, and until next time, we'll try to keep our eyes on the donut and not on the hole.